Even though the horror genre has no shortage of chase sequences over the years, some have stood out more than others. Due to either flawless camera work, sublime directing, atmosphere, or phenomenal performances, I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Horror, and with major spoilers ahead, here are the 10 best chase scenes in horror movies. Number 10. Helen Shivers makes a getaway. I Know What You Did Last Summer. 1997's I Know What You Did Last Summer is gloriously 90s in vibes and execution, being drawn from a Kevin Williamson script and featuring all the decade's heartthrobs, including Fred and Daphne themselves, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Sarah Michelle Gellar. It's not as clever or as inventive as Williamson's work on Scream, but it is fun, delivering scares and chills aplenty, as well as that iconic delivery from Jennifer Love Hewitt. "What are you waiting for?" Which is just like the best quote ever. But apart from the parodied line and the iconic hook-handed villain, I Know What You Did Last Summer also has one really impressive highlight that sort of transcends the rest of the film. A several-minute-long chase sequence involving Gellar's Helen Shivers. And yes, that might just be the coolest horror protagonist name of all time, and also yes, please let me know if you have any that outdo that one down in the comments below. The chase sequence itself involves Helen on the run from the hook-handed killer at the Croker Beauty Queen pageant. The pre-chase sequence is layered with tension, Helen fully aware that the killer could be watching, until eventually Barry, played by Ryan Philippe, is killed and she has to make a getaway on foot. One dead cop later, and Helen is forced to take refuge in her family's department store, which has no power and also loads of creepy mannequins covered in plastic. Lovely. The killer materializes in an all-timer jump scare as one of these mannequins, forcing Helen to use a pole lift to get to the next floor. Then she has to jump out of a window, waking up a few moments later, fireworks now blazing as freedom is just around the bend, only for the killer to pop out of view again and kill her just before she could make it to safety. Oh man, this chase sequence really did have it all. Michelle Gellar totally lived up to the promise of a character with the name Helen Shivers, fighting and scrapping all the way as she was getting chased before meeting a tragic and unfortunate end. Her presence in the movie and this scene individually totally elevates I Know What You Did Last Summer and cemented her as a slasher icon. Number 9. The 8-minute-long hunt. Prom Night, 1980. With the slasher movies being a dime a dozen during the 80s, there were plenty of solid flicks that never really got the credit they deserved. Though Prom Night was of course a mild success upon its release, it has since developed a pretty hefty cult following due to its excellent soundtrack and imaginative kills. Also, it has one of the most spine-tingling chases ever seen in the genre, so it's got that going for it too. The scene begins with Queen Bee, Wendy, in the high school bathroom prepping for the prom. When the lights are suddenly turned off, Wendy finds herself being attacked by a hatchet-wielding maniac. Just everyday, normal high school problems I'm sure we can all relate to. The scene demonstrates a great use of color, since the killer is often billowed in red light, giving off a really creepy predatory vibe. When the antagonist can't be seen, it's obvious when he's near anytime the scene becomes draped in a crimson hue. Just really gorgeous looking motif. Wendy might be a deeply selfish character, but it's hard not to root for her here, as she manages to evade her pursuer for 8 freaking long minutes. Rather than behaving like a damsel in distress, Wendy tries fighting back, hiding behind tables, locking herself in cars, and scrambling for an exit. She may have been a bit of a nasty character, but the way this chase was framed, you really do feel for her. Number 8. The Prologue, 28 Weeks Later. 28 Weeks Later opens up with Don, played by Robert Carlyle, and his wife Alice, played by Catherine McCormack, pulling up in a cottage with several survivors shortly after the outbreak of the Rage virus, as seen in the previous movie, 28 Days Later. When the infected break in, Alice tries to save a boy despite Don's pleas to leave him. When an infected person bursts into the room, Alice begs Don to help her. But not wanting to risk his own life, Don shuts the door, seemingly dooming his wife in the process. After leaping out of the window, Don sprints towards the lake and narrowly escapes on a boat. Not only is this scene visceral from start to finish, it sets the tone for the whole story. Despite the fact that Don's actions are pretty heartless, universe, it emphasizes that in the world of 28 weeks later, there are no heroes, only survivors. Though there are many great visuals throughout the prologue, it's John Murphy's pulse-racing soundtrack that really leaves the biggest impact. As Don's situation worsens more and more, the melody perfectly conveys the escalating chaos and the futility of trying to fight it. This sequel, 28 weeks later, may not have been as captivating as Danny Boyle's original, but it knew how to kick things off with a pretty hefty bang. Number 7. The Pale Man, Pan's Labyrinth. Pan's Labyrinth contains a textbook example of how a chase can be heart-pounding despite being slow and brief. In Guillermo del Toro's dark fantasy, Ophelia finds herself in the lair of a child-eating monster called the Pale Man, played to freakish perfection by Doug Jones. After Ophelia eats from his table, the emaciated demon awakens and begins lumbering towards her. Ophelia runs to the end of the corridor, only for the exit to seal shut in her face. Using a piece of magical chalk, Ophelia draws an exit in the ceiling, allowing her a quick escape. The chase lasts no longer than about a minute, but it's gripping from beginning to end, since every image is designed to elevate the tension completely. Ophelia's face of horror when she sees the doorway vanish, her chalk falling to the floor, the chair that Ophelia stands on wobbling as she desperately draws an exit. While all of that is going on, the Pale Man is in the background, shambling ever closer, eager to devour our protagonist. This nightmarish sequence might be short, but it leaves one hell of an impression, primarily because of Del Toro's flawless direction and Doug Jones' haunting performance as the Pale Man. Gotta love Doug. Number 6. The Subway Chase, Dressed to Kill. In Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma's well-documented love of Hitchcock is taken to its schlockiest extremes. Those of you who know, you know, but even with his schlocky impulses left unrestrained, Dressed to Kill is up there with Blowout as potentially De Palma's most technically accomplished piece of cinema, featuring more split diopters than you can shake a stick at, and also two incredible tension-filled sequences, one of which comes at the very opening and involves Angie Dickinson's character at an art gallery, and the other, the subject of this entry, revolving around the character of Liz Blake, played by De Palma regular Nancy Allen. Having caught the attention of the film's killer, Bobby, Liz is stalked across the city and eventually winds up at a subway station. While there, and trying to avoid Bobby's gaze, who De Palma cleverly obscures at times, she invokes the ire of some local hoodlums before finally making it onto a subway. Liz is, true to form, ignored by the police officer on board, with Bobby and her other pursuers also on the train, ensuring the tension has built to a palpable degree. Then the lights start flickering on and off. The police officer disembarks, and Liz starts getting chased again, until eventually she's rescued by Keith Gordon's young Peter Miller. All in all, it's a brilliant sequence where De Palma's love of Hitchcock shines through in the best ways, cementing Dressed to Kill as one of the director's strongest ever works. Number 5. The Shape Attacks Laurie, Halloween, 1978. If you gotta think of one defining image from the original Halloween, then surely it has to be the shape manifesting from darkness while Laurie Strode is sobbing gently against the wall. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's film is out of this world as far as its ability to break down barriers between the screen and our reality, with Michael Myers' heavy breathing, intense gaze, and slow, methodical movement capable of making it feel as if the shape might be lurking behind our own sofa. Of course, the genius here is that Carpenter allows the tension of Michael's return to build for much of the film's runtime, as he stalks Laurie and her friends during the day before wreaking his havoc once the sun goes down. Michael's rampage ends with him chasing Laurie, who has discovered the bodies of Annie, Linda, and Bob, all set to Carpenter's iconic score. It's an immaculately layered sequence, having Laurie first get out of the Wallace's house, but then also having to contend with getting back into the Doyle house and protecting the two children she's babysitting, Tommy and Lindsay. It all culminates with Laurie in the wardrobe blinding Michael with that coat hanger, and Donald Pleasance's Sam Loomis arriving immediately after and firing 6 shots into his former patient. But the best thing about this chase sequence is that even in its dying embers, Carpenter refuses to provide us relief. Michael's body is gone, his omnipresent breathing confirmation that he was, in fact, the boogeyman. Number 4. The Chainsaw Chase, American Psycho. 2000's American Psycho sees Christian Bale give a career-defining performance as the demented stockbroker Patrick Bateman. When he's not busy detailing his musical tastes or obsessing over his business card, the crazed yuppie is splitting heads and hacking up strangers. In his spare time, Bateman also tortures sex workers in his apartment. Bringing back to Christine and Elizabeth, Bateman promises to show them a pretty good time. Christine, though, gets a bad vibe from Bateman and prepares to leave while he's having his wicked way with Elizabeth. When the young lady realizes that Bateman is actually killing her friend, Christine runs away, frantically trying to look for an exit. Every door she opens reveals mutilated bodies and dismembered body parts, further showcasing the boundless insanity of Bateman's psyche. But just when things look like they couldn't get any worse, Christine hears an engine revving from behind. Turning around, she sees a blood-soaked Bateman wielding a running chainsaw and wearing nothing but sneakers. The fact he actually put on shoes here makes him even scarier, since it indicates he's willing to chase her for as long as possible. As Christine descends down the complex's spiraling stairwell, it looks like she just might make it out. Tragically though, she's skewered to death after Bateman drops the live chainsaw on her from directly above. Though there was no mistake that Patrick Bateman was on his rocker, this scene truly demonstrates just how deeply disturbed he actually was. Number 3. The Sound Booth, Scream 2. Wes Craven's Scream didn't just reignite the director's career, but the slasher genre as a whole. For this reason, a slew of sequels were bound to follow, and speaking personally, I loved that entire trilogy, even 3. You can't put Parker Posey in your horror movie and tell me to dislike it. It's just not happening. But despite my well-documented love for Scream 3, my fave of the bunch, controversially potentially, is Scream 2. Maybe it's the college vibes or the meta commentary on sequels, but it's the one I come back to the most, a decision I always feel personally vindicated by when I get to this big chase sequence. After Ghostface pursues Courtney Cox's Gale Weathers through a recording studio, the news reporter bashes the robed psychopath with a phone before running away. When she sees him again in the recording room, she audibly gasps, seemingly giving away her position. However, Ghostface doesn't notice since he's inside a soundproof room. It's such a brilliant reveal. As Ghostface wanders around the area, Gale tightly weaves around the acoustic dividers and hides in the taping room, narrowly avoiding being seen the entire time. Even though the ghoulish maniac fails to spot Gale throughout most of the scene, they often share the screen, making for one of the most oppressive-feeling chase sequences in Craven's filmography. On top of that, the shrill soundtrack and tight camera angles accentuate Gale's dread in every shot. Truly a masterclass from one of our all-time great horror masters. Number 2. The Hedge Maze, The Shining. It's hard to think of a paranormal horror with more unnerving images than Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. The withered woman in the bathtub, the blood-filled elevator, the twin girls, hell, even the shot of the word Monday was pretty damn startling. And of course, there's the final showdown. By this point in the story, the Overlook Hotel's dark influence has driven Jack Torrance mad, urging him to butcher his wife Wendy and his son Danny. To evade his deranged father, Danny heads into the hedge maze while a blistering snowstorm rages on. What makes a sequence effective is how it's viewed from every direction. The camera often focuses on Danny from behind and Jack from in front, to give the impression he's right on Danny's tail. Though the camera moves normally while focused on Danny, it swerves erratically while Jack is on screen. As the older Torrance closes in, the camera moves faster and cuts to his point of view, heightening the tension exponentially. And with that rattling music playing non-stop, the petrifying climax is bound to leave anyone quaking in their boots. Not much else needs to be said, we all know how much of a masterpiece this film is. And number 1. Sally Makes Her Getaway, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the greatest horror film ever made. And while light on chase sequences, the film's genius is that violence explodes out of nothing, it does include one of the all-time greatest ones in the ending, lasting only for about 2 minutes or so. After seeing her friends and brother massacred by Leatherface, this family of cannibals, Sally is invited down to dinner where they all try and get in on the act of killing her, handing a hammer to their somehow not deceased grandpa and bashing her on the head repeatedly. Sally manages to break free of her bindings though and explodes through the living room window. Now covered in glass, she begins the long limp home to freedom, pursued by Leatherface and the hitchhiker, the latter of whom eventually catches up and starts slashing at her repeatedly as she arrives at a main road. Luckily for her, Superman arrives. And by Superman, I mean the GOAT horror movie bystander. This guy, who flans the hitchhiker with his truck, stops, gets out, helps Sally escape Leatherface, and then lines up an absolute fastball special, dinging the chainsaw-wielding monster in the head with a claw wrench, and then jogging all the way back home, I assume. Sally gets further help from another passerby, who stops his flatbed truck, allowing her to get on just as Leatherface takes one last swing. On a serious note, the entire sequence is just bewildering as an accomplishment of both tension and catharsis. The shot of Sally covered in blood, her screams turning to laughter, Leatherface doing his chainsaw dance baked in golden light, simply incredible. The greatest chase scene ever as far as I'm concerned.